Hello, everybody. Welcome back to a bonus episode of the Rugby Bunker on a Friday after some pretty big news coming out of Ireland regarding the future of Andy Farrell, who has signed a new 4-year contract extension, taking him through to the 2031 Rugby World Cup as the head coach of Ireland. It means that Farrell will have coached Ireland at 3 World Cups, given that he's already coached them to the 2023 tournament, and now he's going to be there for 2027 and for 2031 as well. There's so many subplots kind of pinging off from this. It's news that sort of has reverberations for Ireland, obviously, but also for England and also for Saracens that I wanted to do an episode now rather than wait until we record next week, myself and Charlie. Also because this process allows me to kind of work through some of the things in my mind about this and to kind of think about how this is going to play out for those teams affected. So this is an Irish side who, as we talked about extensively after the Six Nations, myself and Charlie Morgan of the Times on these episodes, Ireland had that terrible game in Paris to start on the Thursday night, and then from then onwards seemed to click into gear. And as I think Charlie said multiple times, must have been ruining how Paris went, because actually after that they looked incredibly strong and had a real chance of winning another Six Nations title. But that opening night just went so wrong. And it was interesting how kind of hard Farrell was on the team's performance in that opening game and then how they rallied. In terms of the project ahead, this is a rebuilding job. And he touched on this in his statement when he spoke about the increasing strength and investment in pathways and the quality of talent coming through, and his confidence in the system and that's been built across the promises and age grade programs. That's a very pertinent point, because Ireland are going to need to, after this 2027 World Cup, over that next 4-year cycle, there's a big rebuild coming. If you look at the amount of Irish players who are kind of in their mid to early 30s, Bundyaki, Ty Byrne, Ian Henderson, Robbie Henshaw, Ty Furlong, Jameson Gibson-Park, James Lowe, Stuart McCloskey, Jack Conan, Gary Ringrose, Andrew Porter, they're all 30 plus, and they're all at the moment key figures for Ireland. So how do you go about replacing them? That would have been, I guess, the kind of big factor on the table for Farrell in making this decision whether to stay with Ireland or whether to go elsewhere. And he clearly fancies that challenge. Now, it's not to say that there aren't, talented players already in the squad or players coming through who he can kind of work with and build with. I think that's now going to be the really exciting thing. So guys like Joe McCarthy, who is still really young at 25 years old, but becomes such a key figure for Ireland. Jamie Osborne will be another. And then you've got people like Edwin Udogbu, Nathan Doak, Zach Ward as well at Ulster, kind of really promising prospects who potentially Ireland could build around for 2031. Farrell clearly likes the idea of that challenge and of the next wave of players coming through. So that's really interesting. I think also there is still this debate around Ireland's fly half, even though Jack Crowley sort of took the 10 jersey back in the Six Nations, and it feels maybe like that's settled now. But obviously you've got how will this summer play out? This has been a number 10 debate that's gone kind of back and forth throughout the last couple of years as Ireland try and figure this out post Sexton. I personally think Crowley has all the ability and the temperament to make it his own, and we'll see how he fares in the Nations Championship this summer. But that's going to be another key part of this rebuild. Who do you sort of settle on and build around? Sam Prendergast is still a very young player at 23 years old. There's still the chance that he goes on to kind of become Ireland's number one fly half and cements himself in that role with a bit more experience and a bit more better game management. I think is the area where Prendergast potentially has kind of let himself down in the past. It's a challenge, kind of regenerating a team like that, and that's why, if you think back to the 2023 World Cup, there was so much hype around that Ireland side because they felt like a team in their prime with that group of players I already mentioned. They were in their prime then, and that was their moment to clinch the World Cup. And now going into 2027, this is like the last hurrah for that group and their last chance to kind of, to get beyond a quarterfinal will be a start, but also to cement their legacy as a great Irish side. So Andy Farrell wants that challenge. And I think the fact that he wants to stick around for that long is really, it's a huge boost for Ireland. And I think getting that out of the way now and getting that uncertainty out of the way kind of less than 18 months going into a Rugby World Cup is huge. I think that just clarifies things, takes away a lot of the speculation. It means that there's less for us to debate, which is a bit of a shame, but at the same time, for Irish rugby, I think it's the right decision. There's an interesting subplot between Andy Farrell not leaving Ireland and staying in Ireland, and the reports about Sean Edwards potentially leaving France, which have been going on in the last couple of weeks, given that Sean Edwards has been on record in the past about being a proud Englishman, but it's never worked out with him in England. The stars haven't aligned, and it hasn't played out where he's come on board with the national side. The fact is that Andy Farrell's deal now is going to run until 2031, which means he will have been out of England and out of the English system and coaching pyramid for 15 years by the time that his contract comes to an end, given that he first went over and worked with Munster and then as an assistant and then took over as head coach from Joe Schmidt. So, and English rugby media fans alike have mourned the fact that Sean Edwards has never been involved with English rugby and they've had to watch his success from afar. And it almost feels as though the same situation is now playing out with Andy Farrell, where there was, I think, tentative excitement during the Six Nations, wondering what England might look like under Andy Farrell and whether 2027 was the time for him to potentially come back to English rugby, the kind of offer that the RFU might make in order to entice him back. And look, maybe it happens in 2031, but it's not going to be happening anytime soon. To dig more into the England side of it, I think I would imagine that Farrell would have been their top target based on this. This is assuming that the World Cup doesn't go to plan and they want to move on from Steve Borthwick, for starters, which isn't a certainty. There's every chance that England bounce back from this terrible Six Nations, their worst ever Six Nations, and look like a World Cup contender again, either this summer or in the autumn. But the reason for the speculation in the first place is because Borthwick's contract is only until 2027, and there doesn't seem to be, recording this at the start of June, there's no kind of immediate intent to sign Borthwick up to a longer extension beyond the World Cup. In the autumn, when England was sort of on top of the world and on that winning run, Bill Sweeney was asked about whether the RFU would look into extending Borthwick's contract beyond 2027, given the good place that English rugby seemed to be in, and Sweeney was very clear that they didn't plan to have those contract talks about extending Borthwick's deal. He said at the time, in the foreseeable future, and this was back in November. So there's no suggestion that the RFU would want to extend Borthwick's deal beyond 2027 now, coming off a tough Six Nations, if they didn't want to do it last November. And so naturally, you are left to, it opens the door to speculate about what England might do in a post-2027 world if they reach a World Cup final, lose a World Cup final, then or win a World Cup final, then Borthwick probably stays. If he doesn't, then that opened the door for this Andy Farrell rumours to kind of generate more momentum. And obviously now that Farrell's out the running, you start to wonder, is it in a way a security boost for Borthwick because Farrell was such an obvious target to potentially come in? Maybe. It makes you start thinking about the other contenders on the shortlist as well, who would be in the frame if England after 2027 aren't happy with Borthwick and they want to move on. People like Ronan O'Gara, people like Scott Robertson, Phil Dowson at Northampton Saints in a coaching ticket with Sam Vesti would also come to mind. Or Rob Baxter's name is always linked with the England role, I feel like, but I'm never sure if it's going to happen now, given it's been going on for so long. Johan van Graan is sort of viewed as the potential successor to Rassie Erasmus and is enjoying tremendous success at Bath. Would he be on the shortlist? You would Hope so. So yeah, it's an interesting development because of what it means for those other potential candidates, what it means for Borthwick as well, and yeah, the lack of, unless England do decide to give him a contract extension beyond the World Cup before the World Cup happens, then this speculation is going to continue. It feels prudent not to. It feels prudent to see how the rest of this year is going to play out, and also next year's Six Nations. But yeah, for now, Borthwick's contract runs out after the World Cup in 2027, and Andy Farrell will not be one of the people in the mix to replace him because he's signed up for Ireland for so much longer. And just finally, the kind of Saracens aspect of it all is quite interesting. So back in the Six Nations period, back in February, there was a report that Saracens had tabled a mega offer to bring Andy Farrell back to the club after the 2027 World Cup as their head coach. Would have meant a reunion for Farrell and Saracens, would have meant a reunion for Farrell with his son Owen, who I'll touch on a bit more in a sec. The reports of this were in the Irish press, and they were strongly denied by Saracens, incredibly strongly denied by Saracens. And obviously now Farrell will not be coming back to Saracens when in 2027, as was reported, there was a suggestion that Saracens offered Farrell a salary of more than $1 million a year, which Saracens then downplayed. But I think Saracens are in an interesting position with Mark McCall stepping back at the end of this season to become a technical advisor and join the board of directors after a 15-year stint as director of rugby. Brendan Venter is coming back from South Africa to take on that role. But it doesn't feel instinctively, and this may turn out to be wrong, it doesn't feel instinctively as though Venter is going to be in that role for, say, 3-4 years. It almost feels as though he's the perfect person, having been an advisor for Saracens even since he moved back to South Africa to continue his practice as a doctor. It doesn't feel as though Venter is sort of the longer term answer. And so you start to wonder where Saracens may turn in a couple of years or in 2-3 years' time, and whether they look actually internally as they have done so much in the past, because there's a whole mixture of potential coaches there who you could imagine taking over in the long run. So Joe Shaw is now currently head coach there. He's been there a long time. He would be an obvious candidate. Alex Goode joined the club as a specialist coach after retirement and has been involved with kind of the club's attack and various other parts of their game. He's admittedly very early on in his coaching career, but he would be someone surely in a couple of years who you might consider. Owen Farrell would be interesting if it ended up being Owen Farrell and not Andy Farrell. But when Owen Farrell came back from Wrestling 92 last summer, it was on a longer deal where the plan was for Owen to play 2 more seasons on his contract as a player, and then to transition into a coaching role and into a kind of a backroom role. Does this development with Andy staying in Ireland, does that lead to Venter doing a couple of years potentially and then Owen taking over? Does that accelerate that process? I think that's going to be one to monitor. It feels right, doesn't it? It feels like something you can see. Owen Farrell coaching Saracens, having spent the last few seasons, or certainly this season, as kind of like a player coach in a way, but also being around the coaching box over the years. His appetite for the game, his appetite for improving, the amount that players, England teammates and Saracens teammates have revered, his work rate, his ambition, his drive over the years. You could see Farrell in that coaching role, which is interesting. Makabunipola is coming back from Van to join Leicester as a player and then to transition into a coaching role. He's been very open about coaching in the future. Is there a world where you have this cohort of former Saracens players with Owen Farrell and Makabunipola and maybe Goode leading the team forward? That seems very, very feasible. And the final name that I sort of thought about with this was Richard Wigglesworth, who has had a stint as a head coach at Leicester Tigers before he joined the England setup under Borthwick. Would he want to return to the club where he had so much success as a player in Saracens to be head coach? That also seems possible. So I appreciate this has probably gone on a bit longer than I planned, but the news of Farrell's contract extension is really interesting for those three teams, for Ireland, for England and Saracens, and kind of opens up all sorts of different subplots that I'm sure we're going to be talking about a lot more on this podcast over the coming months and over the coming years. But yeah, I wanted to get that bonus episode out there. Thank you very much for your support. Please give us a like and a subscribe, and we'll be back next week with England squad reaction and Prem Rugby Awards reaction and another podcast as well, and probably some reaction from the Prem semi-finals as well. It's going to be a very busy week, but yeah, thanks for your time.